The distress beacon cut through the void like a scream in the darkness, a desperate cry for help that rippled across light years of empty space. Ambassador Velton of the Confederation watched the holographic display with trembling manipulators, knowing that what they had just done would change everything. The decision had not come lightly. For cycles upon cycles, the Confederation had maintained its careful distance from the Sol system, from the planet they had designated Death World Class 12, from the species that called themselves human. There were protocols, ancient and unbroken, that dictated one simple rule: never provoke a Deathworlder. Never give them reason to look your way. Never, under any circumstances, invite them into your conflicts. But desperation makes fools of even the wisest beings, and the Confederation was drowning in desperation. The Karthax horde had swept through 17 systems in as many stellar rotations, leaving nothing but ash and silence in their wake. They were a plague, a horror that consumed everything biological and repurposed it into their grotesque biomechanical warriors. Entire civilizations had been rendered down to their base components, their citizens transformed into weapons to be used against the next victims. The Confederation military, proud and ancient, had shattered against them like glass against stone. Every strategy failed. Every defense crumbled. The horde adapted to everything, learning from each encounter, growing stronger with every world they devoured. And now they were 3 systems away from Velton's homeworld, from the crystalline spires of Thelsera, where billions of souls waited in terrified silence for the end to come. The council had debated for days, their voices rising in panic and desperation as the horde drew closer. Some argued for evacuation, for scattering to the stellar winds, and hoping some fragment of their people would survive. Others called for a final stand, a glorious last battle that would at least be remembered. But it was Velton who had stood before them with the forbidden proposal, the one that made even the most desperate counselors recoil in horror. Send a distress call to Earth. Invoke the ancient mutual defense pact that had been signed 300 cycles ago, when humanity had been young to the stars and eager to make friends. A pact that the Confederation had carefully never activated, because they understood what it meant, what it would cost. Because humanity's reputation preceded them like the shockwave of a supernova. They were the species that had looked at a planet where everything wanted to kill them, and decided to become the apex predator anyway. They were the ones who had clawed their way off their death world not through superior technology or inherited wisdom, but through sheer, bloody-minded stubbornness and a capacity for violence that made even the Confederation's war-forged veterans uncomfortable. The galaxy had watched humanity's first contact scenarios with horrified fascination. They had seen human ships, damaged and outgunned, refuse to retreat until every crew member was dead. They had witnessed human ground forces fight with a ferocity that seemed to border on madness, using weapons and tactics that more civilized species found barbaric. And they had heard the stories, passed in hushed tones across 1,000 worlds, of what happened to those who made the mistake of truly angering a human. Velton remembered the first time they had met a human, decades ago, at a diplomatic function on a neutral station. The creature had been smaller than expected, soft-looking with its strange flexible skin and forward-facing predator eyes. It had smiled constantly, showing its flat omnivore teeth, and spoke with warmth about peace and cooperation. But Velton had done their research. They knew that this same creature could run for hours without stopping, could heal from injuries that would kill most species, could survive on almost any organic matter, and could problem-solve with a creativity born from millions of years of evolutionary warfare against a planet that never stopped trying to kill them. And most terrifying of all, humans bonded. They formed emotional connections not just with their own kind, but with anything and everything around them. They made friends of their food animals before they ate them. They kept predators as companions in their homes. They mourned the loss of automated machines and grieved for fictional characters. And once you became something a human cared about, they would move mountains to protect you, or burn galaxies to avenge you. The distress signal had been carefully crafted, every word chosen with the weight of worlds behind it. It had detailed the Horde's advance, the billions already lost, the extinction-level threat bearing down on the Confederation. And then, in the final lines, Velton had added something that had made their own blood run cold to write. They had included footage of a Horde attack on a refugee convoy, ships filled with families fleeing the advance, ships filled with children. Because if there was one thing the galaxy knew about humans, one universal constant that had been observed across every encounter, it was this: humans had an almost pathological protective instinct toward the young of any species. Harm a child within sight of a human, and you would learn why their planet had forged them into weapons. The response had come within hours, far faster than should have been possible across such distances. A single message, text only, in perfect Confederation standard. Received. Responding. Hold your position. And then silence. Velton stood now in the command center, surrounded by displays showing the Horde's inexorable advance. They had perhaps 6 rotations before the vanguard reached the outer colonies. The Council was evacuating the core worlds, preparing for the end. But Velton watched the long-range sensors, searching the void for any sign, any hope that the Deathworlders were coming, that they hadn't simply acknowledged the message and decided the Confederation's fate was not their problem, that humanity's reputation for loyalty was more than just propaganda and wishful thinking. 3 rotations passed. The Horde consumed another system. The Confederation fleet fell back to its final defensive line, every remaining warship gathered in a desperate last stand. And still, the sensors showed nothing from the direction of Sol. Then, on the 4th rotation, reality itself seemed to scream. The space around the Confederation's rally point rippled and tore, and ships began to emerge from faster-than-light transit. But these were not the sleek, elegant vessels of civilized spacefaring races. These were human warships, and they looked like they had been designed by someone who had studied violence and decided to make it into art. They were angular and brutal, covered in armor plating that seemed excessive to the point of absurdity, bristling with weapon systems that ranged from recognizable to utterly alien. Their hulls were painted in colors that made them stand out rather than blend in, adorned with symbols and names that the Confederation's translators struggled to interpret. Unbroken. Remember Arcturus. Last word. Merce's end. More ships kept coming, pouring through the rift in space like an avalanche of steel and fury. Dreadnoughts that dwarfed even the Confederation's largest vessels. Carrier groups that launched wings of fighters moving with an agility that seemed to defy physics. Destroyer squadrons that moved in perfect formation, their targeting systems already painting every piece of debris in the system as potential threats. The fleet kept growing, kept emerging, until the sensors could barely track them all. Velton had expected a task force, perhaps a fleet if humanity was feeling generous. What arrived was an armada that could have conquered the entire Confederation if it had wanted to. And at the center of it all, a ship larger than any other, a mobile fortress that broadcast a simple identification. Terran Federation warship Indomitable, flag vessel. The communication channels crackled to life, and a human voice filled the command center, speaking in perfect Confederation standard with an accent that suggested the speaker had learned it specifically for this moment. Confederation Command, this is Fleet Admiral Marcus Chen of the Terran Federation. We received your distress call. We're here to help. The words were simple, almost casual, but there was something underneath them, a hardness that made Velton's blood chill. This was not the voice of someone coming to negotiate or provide humanitarian aid. This was the voice of someone who had come to make a point. "Admiral," Belton managed, finding their voice after a moment of stunned silence. "We are grateful beyond measure for your response. The Horde is approaching our last defensive line. We have perhaps 2 rotations before they arrive in force. We will coordinate our remaining forces with your fleet and make our final stand together." There was a pause, and Velton could almost feel the human's expression changing across the light years. When Shin spoke again, the casual tone was gone, replaced with something cold and precise. "I don't think you understand, Ambassador. We didn't come here to make a last stand. We came here to end this." The display shifted, showing the human fleet beginning to move, not into defensive positions around the Confederation worlds, but outward toward the approaching Horde. The Horde has consumed 17 of your systems. They've killed billions of your people. They've turned your citizens into weapons, and your worlds into graveyards. And according to your distress call, they attacked refugee ships. Ships carrying children. The temperature in the command center seemed to drop. Every being present felt it, that shift in the atmosphere that came when a predator stopped pretending to be civilized. "We have a saying on Earth, Ambassador. Fuck around and find out. The Horde has done the first part. We're here to provide the second." The human fleet accelerated, moving faster than anything that size should have been able to, pushing their engines in ways that would have torn lesser vessels apart. They didn't deploy into defensive formations. They formed a spearhead, a weapon aimed directly at the heart of the approaching Horde. And as they moved, the communication channels filled with something the Confederation had never heard before: humans preparing for war. Music, of all things, blasted across open channels, driving rhythms and primal beats that seemed designed to stir something ancient and violent in the human psyche. Voices called out battle cries and unit identifiers, coordinating with an efficiency that spoke of countless drills and real combat experience. And underneath it all, a current of cold fury that made even the Confederation's most hardened warriors grateful they were on humanity's side. The Horde detected the human fleet and did what it always did: adapted. Bioships began to merge and reconfigure, forming larger and more dangerous constructs. Swarm fighters deployed in clouds so thick they looked like nebulae on the sensors. Weapons systems that had torn through Confederation armor like paper charged and aimed. The Horde had faced dozens of species, consumed their knowledge and their technology, learned from every victory. They were confident. They were unstoppable. They had never fought humans before. The first contact came at the edge of the system, where the vanguard of the Horde met the tip of humanity's spear. The Horde opened fire with weapons that could vaporize continents, unleash swarms that could strip a ship to its frame in seconds, deployed tactics that had broken every fleet they had ever faced. The humans responded with something the Horde had never encountered. They fired back harder. Human weapons lit up the void with colors that didn't exist in nature, with energies that made reality itself flinch. Railguns hurled projectiles at relativistic speeds, turning them into kinetic kill vehicles that punched through Horde bioships like they were tissue paper. Missile salvos filled the space between fleets with thousands of warheads, each one containing enough explosive force to crack a moon. Energy weapons carved through the Horde swarms with surgical precision, point defense systems that never missed tracking targets too small and too fast for organic reflexes. And when the Horde tried to close to boarding range, tried to use their biomechanical warriors to infest and consume the human ships, they discovered why humanity had spent centuries perfecting the art of close-quarters combat. Marines in powered armor that made them look like walking tanks teleported directly onto Horde vessels, moving through the organic corridors, with weapons that ranged from plasma rifles to what appeared to be simply very large knives. They fought with a coordination that seemed almost prescient, covering angles and supporting each other with the ease of long practice. And they fought with a savagery that shocked even the Horde, creatures that had been designed and evolved for nothing but killing. Because humans, it turned out, were very good at killing. Evolution had made them pursuit predators, capable of tracking prey across continents and refusing to stop until their target fell. History had made them warriors, thousands of years of fighting each other, forging tactics and strategies written in blood across countless battlefields. And their nature had made them protective, viciously and violently protective of anything they considered theirs. And the moment humanity had signed the Mutual Defense Pact, the Confederation had become theirs. Velton watched the battle unfold on the displays, barely able to process what they were seeing. The Horde, the unstoppable plague that had broken the Confederation's spirit, was being systematically dismantled. Human ships moved through their formations like sharks through a school of fish, targeting command vessels and supply chains with a tactical acumen that spoke of extensive study. They adapted faster than the Horde could, anticipated strategies before they were deployed, and responded to every move with overwhelming force. This wasn't a battle. This was an extermination. And the humans were not being merciful. Admiral Chen's voice cut through the chaos of the battle, addressing the Confederation command directly, while simultaneously coordinating a fleet action that spanned light seconds of space. Ambassador Velton, I need you to understand something. I need all of your people to understand something. On the displays, a human dreadnought fired its main cannon, a weapon so powerful that the backwash from the shot temporarily blinded sensors across half the fleet. The beam carved through 3 Horde capital ships in a single firing, vaporizing them so completely that not even debris remained. When you sent that distress call, when you showed us what the Horde had done, when you showed us those refugee ships, those children, you didn't just ask for help. You made this personal. Another wave of Horde reinforcements emerged from the outer system, attempting to flank the human formation. They never made it. A squadron of human cruisers that had been holding in reserve opened fire with weapons the Confederation had no name for, tearing rifts in space itself that swallowed the Horde ships whole before collapsing with bursts of radiation that would have sterilized planets. Humanity has a weakness, Ambassador. We're a young species, barely out of our home system by the standards of galactic history. We're not the strongest or the smartest or the most technologically advanced. But we have one trait that our evolution on a death world burned into our very DNA. We bond. We form connections. We adopt things into our pack, our tribe, our family. And once something is family, we will do anything, sacrifice anything, endure anything to protect it. The human fleet split into 3 prongs, each one driving deeper into the Horde formation with a precision that made it clear this wasn't improvisation. This was a plan, one that had been formulated in the hours between receiving the distress call and arriving at the battlefield. They had studied the Horde's tactics, analyzed every piece of data the Confederation had provided, and crafted a response designed to exploit every weakness and negate every strength. This was humanity at war, and it was terrifying to behold. 300 years ago, we signed a treaty with the Confederation. At the time, we were nobody, just another new species trying to find our place in the galaxy. You didn't have to acknowledge us. You didn't have to offer friendship. But you did. You welcomed us. You traded with us. You treated us like equals when most of the galaxy treated us like dangerous animals that had somehow learned to use tools. A Horde command vessel, larger than any other, attempted to ram one of the human carriers in a desperate suicide attack. It never made contact. Human fighters, moving in a coordinated strike that must have required split-second timing, crippled its propulsion systems and guidance controls, sending it tumbling harmlessly past its target. Then the fighters did something that made Velton's blood run cold. They didn't destroy it. They left it crippled and helpless, broadcasting its failure to the rest of the Horde. A message, clear and brutal. So when the Horde came for you, when they started killing your people and destroying your worlds, they made a critical mistake. They hurt our friends. They attacked our allies. They killed beings we had sworn to protect. And they touched children. Chen's voice dropped, becoming something quiet and deadly. We don't forgive that. We don't forget that. And we sure as hell don't show mercy for that. The battle shifted as more human ships continued to arrive, wave after wave of reinforcements that suggested this wasn't just a fleet. This was a mobilization, a gathering of force that must have pulled vessels from across human space. How many ships did they have? How much of their military had they committed to this fight? The answer became clear as the sensors updated their count. All of it. Humanity had brought everything they had. The Horde, for the first time in its existence, began to retreat. Not in an organized withdrawal, but in a rout, bioships fleeing in all directions as the human onslaught continued. But the humans didn't let them run. Didn't give them the chance to regroup and adapt. They pursued with the relentless determination of their predator ancestors, hunting down every ship, every fragment, every piece of the Horde that tried to escape. They were making sure that nothing survived. That nothing could return to threaten the Confederation again. That the Horde learned, in its final moments, what it meant to provoke a species that had spent its entire existence fighting to survive on a planet that had tried for millions of years to kill them. Velton watched as human boarding parties breached a Horde processing facility. One of the massive biostructures where captured beings were transformed into warriors. The feeds from inside were brief, the humans' helmet cameras showing only glimpses of what they found there. But those glimpses were enough. The rage that erupted over the human communication channels was palpable, voices losing their professional calm and becoming something primal and furious. What happened next would be spoken about in whispers across the galaxy for generations. The humans didn't just destroy the facility. They tore it apart piece by piece, making sure every being that had been captured was freed. Every process was reversed if possible. Every single Horde construct was eliminated with extreme prejudice. And then they broadcast what they had found, sending it across all channels so that every human ship, every human warrior could see exactly what they were fighting against. The battle became a massacre. Human forces stopped holding anything back, stopped showing any restraint whatsoever. Weapons that had clearly been held in reserve, technologies that made the Confederation scientists gasp in shock and horror, were deployed without hesitation. The humans weren't just winning. They were making an example. They were sending a message to the entire galaxy, one written in the burning wreckage of the Horde fleet and the scattered atoms of their bioships. The message was simple: humanity protects its own. And there is no force in this universe, no matter how powerful or relentless, that can stand against a species of Deathworlders when they decide something is worth fighting for. The Horde's command structure, such as it was, attempted one final gambit. They gathered their remaining forces, every ship and warrior they had left, and launched a desperate assault on the human flagship. If they could kill the Admiral, break the human command structure, perhaps they could still salvage something from this disaster. It was the same tactic that had worked against dozens of other species, the decapitation strike that had shattered countless fleets. The humans saw them coming and did something the Horde didn't expect. They let them come. The indomitable Admiral Chen's flagship stood alone as the Horde threw everything they had at it. Weapons fire that could have cracked a planet's crust hammered against its shields. Swarms of biofighters attempted to overwhelm its point defenses. Boarding craft tried to latch onto its hull and breach its armor. And through it all, the Indomitable simply endured. its shields held against impossible odds, its weapons carved through the swarms with methodical precision, its armor, meters thick and reinforced with materials that seemed to break physics, turned aside every penetration attempt. And when the Horde finally managed to breach the hull and pour warriors into the ship's corridors, they discovered why humans built their vessels with multiple layers of internal defenses. Why every human ship was designed to be fought from, not just flown in. The Horde warriors, creatures designed and evolved for nothing but killing, found themselves facing human marines in powered armor within a ship that had been turned into a kill zone. Bulkheads slammed down, dividing the boarders into manageable groups. Automated defenses activated, filling corridors with fire and shrapnel. And then the Marines counterattacked, moving through their own ship with the ease of long familiarity, using every corner and junction as a weapon. They didn't just repel the boarders. They annihilated them, clearing their ship with a professional brutality that made it clear this was far from the first time they had done this. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Admiral Chen coordinated both the fleet action and the defense of his own ship without missing a beat, his voice calm and steady even as explosions rocked the vessel around him. He was making a point, Velton realized. Showing the Horde that they couldn't win, that even their most desperate tactics were futile against an enemy that had been forged in the crucible of a death world. Humanity had learned to fight not just against external threats, but against their own planet, against nature itself. They had survived and thrived on a world where everything from the microorganisms to the megafauna wanted them dead. What chance did the Horde have against a species that had overcome those odds? The slaughter continued for what felt like an eternity, but was measured in mere hours by the chronometers. Every Horde vessel that stood and fought was destroyed. Every one that fled was hunted down. The humans moved through the system like an avenging force of nature, methodical and merciless, ensuring that not a single fragment of the Horde survived. And then, when the last bioship had been reduced to its component atoms, when the last warrior had fallen to human weapons, Admiral Chen issued an order that made every being in the Confederation understand just how seriously humanity took the concept of protection. All ships, prepare for system-by-system advance. We're going after every Horde nest, every occupied world, every facility where they process captives. We're not stopping until we've reversed every atrocity they've committed and eliminated every trace of their existence from Confederation space. Velton's voice cracked as they responded. Admiral, that could take cycles. Years. You're talking about committing your entire fleet to an extended campaign deep in Horde territory. Chen's response was immediate and firm. Yes. That's exactly what I'm talking about. The Horde made the mistake of attacking our allies and harming innocent beings under our protection. They're going to learn that such actions have consequences. Permanent ones. The human fleet began to organize, transitioning from battle formation to campaign deployment with an efficiency that spoke of extensive planning. They weren't just prepared for a single battle. They had come ready for a war, and they weren't leaving until it was won. Supply ships moved forward, establishing logistics chains that would support extended operations. Construction vessels began building forward operating bases from asteroid materials, creating infrastructure on the fly. This wasn't an expedition. This was a conquest, a systematic elimination of a threat that had terrorized the Confederation for too long. Over the next rotation, the Confederation watched in awe as humanity fulfilled its promise. The human fleet split into task forces, each one assigned to a different Horde-occupied system. They moved with a speed and coordination that suggested they had been drilling for exactly this scenario, like they had been waiting for an excuse to show the galaxy what they were truly capable of when unleashed. World after world fell to the human advance. Not conquered, but liberated, the Horde presence being systematically excised like a cancer. And with each liberation came more proof of the Horde's atrocities, more evidence of the processing facilities, and the nightmares they had inflicted on the Confederation's citizens. Each discovery made the humans angrier, more determined, more relentless in their pursuit of complete and total victory. Velton accompanied one of the human liberation forces to their homeworld of Thelsera, which had been preparing for imminent invasion when the humans arrived. They watched as human Marines, working alongside Confederation security forces, cleared the planet of Horde infiltrators that had been laying the groundwork for the invasion. The humans worked with a professional courtesy toward the Confederation forces, but there was an underlying intensity to everything they did, a barely contained fury that manifested in how thoroughly they eliminated every Horde presence they found. A young human lieutenant, her armor scarred from the fighting in orbit, approached Velton during a brief lull in operations. "Ambassador, I wanted you to know something. What you did, sending the distress call, that took courage." A lot of species would have just rolled over and accepted their fate. But you fought. You reached out. You asked for help. She paused, her hand resting on the weapon at her side. That matters to us. That courage, that refusal to give up, that's something we respect. Something we understand. Velton struggled to find words, their translators struggling to keep up with the emotions flooding through them. "Your people have sacrificed so much, come so far to help us. We can never repay this debt." The lieutenant smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes, which remained hard and focused on the task at hand. "You don't owe us anything, Ambassador. This is what allies do. What family does. You would do the same for us if our positions were reversed." She looked out at the city beyond, where Confederation citizens were emerging from their shelters, seeing human soldiers in the streets and realizing they had been saved. Besides, the Horde made this personal when they attacked those refugee ships. When they hurt kids. We have a saying on Earth, "You don't fuck with our cubs, and we won't show you why that's a rule." The Horde didn't get the memo. The campaign continued for 3 standard cycles, human forces pushing deeper and deeper into what had been Horde territory, reclaiming every world, liberating every facility, freeing every captive that could be saved. They brought with them not just weapons and warriors, but medical teams to treat the injured, engineers to rebuild infrastructure, counselors to help survivors process their trauma. Humanity, it turned out, was just as proficient at healing as they were at hurting, having learned both skills from necessity on their brutal homeworld. The psychological impact on the Confederation was profound. They had spent cycles living in terror of the Horde, watching their military crumble, preparing for extinction. And then humanity had arrived and, in a matter of weeks, had not just stopped the threat but eliminated it entirely. The humans moved through Horde space like a wildfire, leaving nothing but cleansed worlds and freed prisoners in their wake. It was hard to process, hard to accept that the nightmare was truly over. But what struck Velton most deeply wasn't the military prowess or the technological superiority the humans had displayed. It was the care they showed for every rescued prisoner, the gentleness in the hands of warriors who had just finished slaughtering Horde bioships by the thousands. They treated each liberated being like they were precious, like their suffering mattered, like their lives had value beyond mere numbers on a casualty report. The humans mourned every captive they couldn't save, held services for the dead of species they had never even met before, and made sure every name was recorded and remembered. They weren't just warriors. They were guardians, protectors who fought with fury but cared with a depth that seemed bottomless. Finally, after 3 cycles of non-stop operations, Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the Indomitable and delivered a message to both the Confederation government and his own fleet. "The Horde has been eliminated. Every nest destroyed, every facility liberated, every captive freed that we could save. Confederation space is secure." He paused, and when he continued, his voice carried a note of something that might have been sadness. "We found records in their central processing facility. The Horde wasn't just expanding randomly. They were targeting specific species, ones they had identified as weak or vulnerable. The Confederation was on that list because you value life, because you show mercy, because you're civilized." Another pause, longer this time. They saw those qualities as weaknesses to be exploited. They were wrong. Your civilization's commitment to life and mercy isn't a weakness. It's a strength. It's what made you reach out for help instead of giving up. It's what saved you. Velton heard the words and understood the deeper meaning. Humanity was saying that the Confederation's way of life, their values and principles, were worth preserving, worth fighting for, worth the sacrifice of human lives and resources. It was a validation that brought tears to Velton's eyes, a relief so profound it was almost painful. "But I want to be clear about something," Chen continued, and now his voice hardened into steel. "The galaxy needs to understand what happened here. The Horde targeted the Confederation because they thought you were weak. They thought you were easy prey. They were wrong, but not just because you were stronger than they realized. They were wrong because you weren't alone." The message went out across every communication channel, broadcast to every corner of civilized space where species huddled in their worlds and watched the darkness between the stars with wary eyes. Admiral Chen's face appeared on a trillion screens, his expression serious, his words chosen with care. "This is Fleet Admiral Marcus Chen of the Terran Federation, speaking to all species who can hear this transmission. Recently, the Confederation of United Worlds faced an existential threat from an enemy known as the Horde. This enemy had already consumed 17 systems, killed billions, and was advancing toward the complete extinction of the Confederation species." He paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. "The Confederation sent us a distress call, invoking a mutual defense treaty signed 300 years ago. We responded. Not because we were obligated to, though the treaty certainly required it. We responded because the Confederation are our friends, our allies, our family." The display behind him showed footage from the battles, human ships tearing through Horde formations, Marines clearing facilities, medical teams treating survivors. It was a comprehensive record of humanity's response, edited for public consumption, but losing none of its impact. "I want to make something absolutely clear to every species watching this. Humanity takes its commitments seriously. When we sign a treaty, we mean it. When we call someone an ally, we will fight for them. When we consider someone family, we will die for them. The Confederation learned this. The Horde learned this in their final moments." Chen's expression hardened, becoming something cold and absolute. "But there's another lesson here, one that I need the entire galaxy to understand. Humanity evolved on a death world. We are, by galactic classification, an apex predator species. We have capabilities that most civilized species find disturbing. We can fight for days without rest. We can survive injuries that would kill most beings. We can eat almost anything organic. We can adapt to almost any environment. And we have a capacity for violence that comes from millions of years of evolutionary warfare against a planet that spent every day trying to kill us." He leaned forward, his eyes seeming to look directly at every being watching. "We have spent our entire history trying to be better than our nature, trying to be civilized, peaceful, worthy of joining the galactic community. We've bent over backward to prove we're not monsters, not the savage beasts that some species feared we were. And we will continue to do that. We will continue to strive for peace, to seek diplomatic solutions, to be the friends and allies that the Confederation has known us to be." The pause was deliberate, A moment of silence that felt heavy with meaning. But if you threaten our allies, if you attack our friends, if you harm innocent beings under our protection, especially if you harm children, then you will learn why our planet forged us into weapons. You will discover what it means to face a species that has spent its entire existence learning how to kill things that were bigger, stronger, and more dangerous than we were. You will understand why we call our homeworld a death world, and why we survived it when so many others would have perished. Behind him, the display showed the final moments of the Horde's Central Command vessel, destroyed by concentrated fire from a dozen human warships simultaneously. It was a statement, visual proof of humanity's capabilities when roused to action. The Horde made the mistake of seeing mercy as weakness, of interpreting civilization as vulnerability. They attacked the Confederation because they thought kindness meant the lack of ability to fight back. They learned differently. Let their fate serve as a lesson to any other species that might be considering similar actions. Chen's voice softened slightly, becoming almost gentle. To our allies, to the species who have shown us friendship and respect, who have welcomed us into the galactic community despite our violent origins, we want you to know this: you are safe. We will protect you. The treaty we signed with the Confederation isn't just words on a document. It's a promise, backed by every ship in our fleet, every warrior in our military, and every citizen of Earth who believes that civilization is worth fighting for. The transmission ended, but its impact rippled across the galaxy like a shockwave. Species that had been considering expansion into Confederation space suddenly remembered they had other priorities. Pirates and raiders, who had been eyeing human trade routes, decided that there were easier targets elsewhere. And civilizations that had been debating whether to reach out to humanity for trade or diplomatic relations suddenly found the courage to do so, understanding that humanity's reputation for violence came with an equal reputation for loyalty. In the cycles that followed, Velton watched as their people began to rebuild, to heal from the trauma of the Horde's assault. Human engineers helped reconstruct destroyed infrastructure. Human doctors trained Confederation medical personnel in new trauma treatment techniques. Human counselors worked with survivors, helping them process what they had endured. And human diplomats negotiated new treaties, expanded trade agreements, and deepened the relationship between the two species. But more than any of that, there was a change in how the Confederation viewed humanity. The fear was gone, replaced by a deep respect and an even deeper gratitude. They had seen what humans could do when pushed, had witnessed the full fury of a death world species unleashed, and they understood now why humanity had been so careful to be civilized, so determined to be peaceful. Because the alternative was terrifying beyond measure. Velton stood in a memorial garden on Thelsera, looking at a monument that had been erected to commemorate the war. It listed the names of every being who had fallen to the Horde, Confederation and human alike, carved into crystalline pillars that caught the light of their sun and threw rainbows across the ground. The human casualties had been surprisingly light given the scale of the conflict, their superior technology and tactics minimizing losses. But each name was treated with the same reverence, each death mourned with the same intensity. A human marine stood beside them, a young woman named Sarah, who had been part of the Liberation Force. She had requested permission to visit the memorial, to pay her respects to the fallen. Velton had accompanied her, curious about this need humans had to remember their dead. In human culture, Sarah said quietly, we have a saying. The dead are not truly gone until the last person who remembers them is gone. That's why we build memorials, why we record names, why we tell stories, so that those who died are never truly forgotten. Velton's translator caught the emotion in her voice, the sadness tinged with something like pride. Your people fought bravely. Your soldiers held the line against impossible odds, buying time for evacuations, protecting civilians even when it meant certain death. That's courage. That's honor. That deserves to be remembered. She touched the memorial, her fingers tracing over a name Velton recognized as one of their commanders who had fallen in the early battles. And your people are our people now. These names, these lives, they matter to us. That's what the treaty means. That's what being allies means. Your losses are our losses. Your grief is our grief. And your future is something we will fight to protect. Velton felt something break inside them, the careful control they had maintained throughout the war finally crumbling. They wept, openly and without shame, for the billions lost, for the world scarred, for the innocence that could never be recovered. And Sarah stood with them, a warrior from a death world offering silent comfort to an ambassador from a civilization that had been brought to the brink of extinction. The galaxy watched and learned. Humanity's response to the Confederation's distress call became a case study in military academies across 1,000 worlds. Strategists analyzed their tactics, politicians debated the implications of their intervention, and sociologists tried to understand the psychological mechanisms that had driven such a comprehensive response. But beyond the analysis and debate, a simpler truth emerged. Humanity had meant what they said. They were loyal. They protected their allies. They showed no mercy to those who threatened the innocent. And if you sent them an SOS, if you asked for help and they considered you worthy of that help, they would move heaven and earth to answer that call. Even if it meant revealing the full extent of their capabilities, even if it meant showing the galaxy why their homeworld had forged them into apex predators, even if it meant fighting a war that wasn't theirs and suffering casualties for people they barely knew. Because that's what family did. And in humanity's eyes, once you signed that treaty, once you showed them trust and friendship, you became family. Velton returned to their duties as ambassador with a new understanding of the species they represented the Confederation to. Humans were dangerous, yes. They were capable of violence that made even hardened warriors flinch. But that capacity for violence came packaged with a capacity for compassion that was equally profound. They bonded not just with their own kind, but with anyone who showed them trust. They fought not just for survival, but for principles, for ideals, for the belief that civilization was worth preserving even at great cost. And they remembered every promise, every treaty, every commitment. They remembered, and they honored those obligations with a fierce determination that came from their evolutionary history, as a species that had learned early that survival required cooperation, that strength came from unity, that the tribe was worth protecting even at the cost of individual sacrifice. The memorial garden on Thel-Sera became a place of pilgrimage for beings from across the Confederation and beyond. They came to see the names, to understand what had happened, to learn about the war that had almost destroyed one civilization and revealed the true nature of another. And always, there were human visitors, warriors and civilians alike, standing in silence before the memorial, paying respects to the fallen of a species they might never have met, but had considered worthy of protection. Admiral Chen's message continued to echo across the stars, a declaration that humanity had staked its claim not as conquerors, but as guardians. They were a young species, barely out of their home system by the standards of galactic history. But they had proven something that would reshape diplomatic relations for generations to come. That death world species could be civilized, that predators could be protectors, and that the most dangerous beings in the galaxy could also be the most loyal allies. And so the lesson was learned, carved into the collective consciousness of every spacefaring civilization. Sending an SOS to Earth comes at a cost. Not to those who send it, but to those who made it necessary. Because humanity has many qualities that make them formidable, but perhaps none more so than this. They protect their own. And if you threaten what they protect, If you harm those they have sworn to defend, then you will learn why their planet tried so hard to kill them and failed. You will face the full fury of a species that has spent millions of years learning how to survive against impossible odds. You will discover what it means to fight beings who see obstacles as challenges, who turn disasters into opportunities, who refuse to give up no matter how dire the circumstances become. The Deathworlders show no mercy because mercy is reserved for those who deserve it. And if you've attacked their friends, harmed the innocent, threatened the young, then you have forfeited any claim to that mercy. You have chosen to face humanity at its most primal, its most dangerous, its most absolutely unforgiving. The Horde learned this lesson too late to profit from it. Let their fate serve as a warning to all who come after. Humanity is loyal to its allies and merciless to its enemies. Choose wisely which category you fall into, because once that choice is made, there is no going back.